Very, very good evening. Dispatches from the Frontline, episode 7. My name is Raj Amir. Let's get on with this. A series of dispatches. I'm committed to sharing 9 dispatches over the summer period for free to earn, getting them out to as many people as possible. I've been campaigning now for over 6 years, primarily in Oldham, around a whole host of issues to do. Essentially, when you want to break it down, the failure of multiculturalism, some people say the challenges of everything you're currently seeing that's spilling out on the streets, we've been tackling in Oldham for the last 6 years and more. This episode, Dispatches from the Frontline, is entitled Cartel Control or Sectarian Surrender. And I've gone with the strap line because I genuinely feel this. Playing with fire, the price of the Muslim bloc vote, or perhaps it should be the price for the Muslim bloc vote, depending on where you're currently at, whether you've paid the price or whether you're yet to pay the price. If you're from a town or a city that hasn't embarked on this journey yet, please let me know and I might consider moving there, is how I feel, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. What I've got is a series of slides. I have in front of me a tablet that I use, and I'll put the slides, I'll talk. I'm not scripted, as you can see. I don't put anything on a script. No one writes my stuff for me. I produce the content myself, and it's a field that I've been working in now for 30 years or so. So it's something I have a grasp of. So let's get on with this evening.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
I put 3 photographs there because all 3 of them are relevant in many ways. First of all, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. We've got George Galloway, who until recently was the MP for Rochdale. And of course in the middle, the leader of Oldham Council and the chair of the Labour Party National Constitutional Committee, Arooj Shah. If you come to my town, you'll find out a very divisive figure. Move on. Some definitions. The definitions we need, because I've been arrested on matters such as this. Falsely arrested, repeatedly, by Greater Manchester Police at the instructions of people such as Arooj Shah. One of the arrests was to do with my use of the term cartel. So I'm very clear, and so Greater Manchester Police are also very clear. This is my definition of the term cartel. It's taken out of the dictionary. A coalition or cooperative arrangement between parties intended to promote a mutual interest. That's what the definition of a cartel is. And calling your brand of politics and the way you hang out with Pakistani men that come at every election time and all your associates in the same way, I don't think that's an unfair definition on whatever, and even if it is unfair, it definitely isn't criminal. As is the definition of what the goal of a cartel is. The goal of a cartel is to improve profits and dominate the market. Improve profits, dominate what market? In this context, the political market, by limiting competition. Cartels are often secret and are considered serious crimes in many countries, including the United Kingdom. So that's a definition of a cartel. The term sectarian, when I use the term sectarian, and I specifically use it in the Oldham context, in reference to a councillor called Councillor Cameron Ghaffar and his sidekick Councillor Shoaib Akhtar. They've played a Muslim card. Councillor Cameron Ghaffar was suspended from the Conservative Party for anti-Semitism. His colleagues were kicked out of the Conservative Party for anti-Semitism. Councillor Shoaib Akhtar left the Labour Party allegedly because of Palestine. It wasn't. They were going to lose an election, which is why he left. But they played a Muslim card. So that's why I describe them as sectarians. They don't just represent a small group in the way a cartel do. They have a specific agenda, and that's attached to a particular sect or party, especially in religion. So that's why I call them sectarians. The phrase sectarian conflict, you will know from Northern Ireland, really, between the nationalists and the unionists. So it's the disparity of religious thought, such as between Sunni and Shia Muslims. So that's what I make reference to when I describe these people as sectarians. They want separate and they promote a narrow Islamic Muslim agenda servicing people with those viewpoints. And I'm not comfortable with it. I never have been comfortable with it. It still isn't illegal in this country not to be a sectarian. I am a non-sectarian. I am a Democrat. I am, if anything, I'm a secularist. and I believe in free association between people and the tolerance of different beliefs. Is that not a liberal Western democracy is? So that's what I am, and I'm definitely pluralist when it comes to religion and in politics. I have friends across political beliefs. I have friends across all religious beliefs and none. And I believe that's what politicians should have and political groups should have, rather than prioritise one ethnic or one religious group. And that's what I believe is currently taking place, not just in Oldham but across the country, particularly exploited through the Gaza conflict. You've all seen it. In the general election, just over a month ago, there were 57 constituencies where Labour's biggest challenger was either a Green Party candidate or a Workers' Party candidate. Now what you guys might be thinking is, oh, that's all right. Because, no, it's not okay. Because the Workers' Party, to all extents and purposes, went into all of the Muslim areas and found what I described to as a Muslim-focused, Islam-focused candidate to represent them, or someone who can capture that vote to represent them. So that's what took place predominantly with the Workers' Party candidates, who finished second behind Labour. And the Green Party sadly played that same game as well. Suddenly we saw a whole host of bearded Muslims become Green Party candidates. There's nothing green in their credentials, by the way, particularly around the Green Party's position on transgender and issues like that, rights. I don't think they'll conform at all to that. So the Green Party attempting to promote itself, or these people infiltrating the Green Party, but the Green Party, the people who control the branches, knew what was going on. They welcomed these people, and the Workers' Party exploited that. And 57 constituencies in this general election, a Green Party or a Workers' Party candidate came second. They were the biggest challenger to Labour, and they came from out of nowhere. They're not as though they've been built up ever. They came from out of nowhere. And independent and Workers' Party candidates are now the second to Labour in 17 constituencies, concentrated in areas with high Muslim population. So there's a direct correlation. The Muslim bloc vote left Labour and went and joined the Workers' Party or the Green Party, who took them in. And in these 57 constituencies where the biggest challenger was a Muslim bloc vote. That's what the code is. It was a Muslim bloc vote. In these 57 constituencies where the biggest challenger was a Muslim bloc vote, in a number of these areas, Labour only managed to keep a hold because there was a split between the bloc vote. So there's a split between the Greens and the various independents. And in many areas where Labour managed to keep hold of control, they didn't win on politics. They didn't win on policies. They went and exploited the historical tribal networks and relationships that they had. I call them cartels, because that's what they are. I call them local cartel associations. And when I said the chickens came home to roost, which is how I describe this, the reason I describe it as chickens coming home to roost is that Labour in particular for decades have exploited the ethnic minority community, the Muslim community in the main, and developed partnerships with them in a not very democratic way. It's the equivalent of a dog biting the hand of its master. And that's what took place. Labour, of course, have a history with the Muslim bloc vote, and it's not a nice history. Some stats: 25 Muslim MPs in Parliament, 19 of them are Labour. The vast majority, historically, of the Muslim community in the United Kingdom vote for Labour, and 19 of the 25 MPs are Labour. 4 of them, by the way, are pro-Palestinian. So what's that? 23 of them? There are 2 Conservative MPs that are Muslim. Broadly speaking, there are 2 types of Muslim MPs. And I'm generalising here. There's a lady called Sina Alina Khan, doctor. Politically sound, if you're of a Labour mindset. She's there because of policy. She's not there because of her identity. Even if in her identity is that she's a doctor. She's been elected because of her politics by demographic that includes substantial non-Muslims. People like Dr. Aline Khan would get elected in any constituency where Labour had a strong presence. Then there are people like the picture I put up there of Tulip Siddiqui. She is, in my opinion, elected off the back of sectarian divisions imported from overseas. And I've picked her on purpose because she's Bangladeshi and I'm Bangladeshi, so someone can claim me of being a racist against my own ethnic background. We'll try that if you want. Tulip Siddiqui's aunt, until very recently, was in charge of Bangladesh. She's just been ousted in a coup of some sort. Yeah, Hasina, Sheikh Hasina. So her aunt ran Bangladesh, and the supporters from Bangladesh imported here, the politics of Bangladesh imported here, is what got her elected. Had nothing to do with her policies, had nothing to do with her political nous or any of that. The Labour Party exploited that to get her in because they knew by having her, they would have a block vote. In this instance, a Bangladeshi block vote. Now, in the scheme of things, you think, okay, 25 Muslim MPs, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal isn't really the MPs, although it should be. It's emerging, it's increasingly emerging. I mean, for the first time ever, from the UK, from mainland England, we've got 4 MPs standing on a clear sectarian platform. That's what the pro-Palestinian 4 MPs are. They're standing on a clear sectarian platform. But it's when you move to local government, councils, with the big issues, with the big challenges, it's where we've been fighting in Oldham for the last 6 years. Now, I can't have a conversation with you about Muslim communities. I can't have a conversation... Let me see which one's better. That one's better, I think. I can't. No, I'll do this one. I can't have a conversation with you on Muslim communities, the Labour Party, without talking about organised crime, the cartels. And what I mean by that is Labour, at a local level, has courted the bloc Muslim vote in 2 ways. One, it has focused on Muslim communities. You saw how Keir Starmer exploited the riots and particularly made focus on the need to protect Muslim communities. I didn't say that, he said that himself. So they forever presented themselves as the ambassador of Muslim communities. And the way in which they've controlled the Muslim communities is through what I call the cartel block vote. Cartel controlled block vote, which in turn has a relationship here. And they've done that using or exploiting postal votes. And these cartels, in terms of political cartels, more often than not, when you scratch the surface, across the country, they have links to organised crime in the communities where they operate. Whether it's Bradford, Keighley, Telford, you name in fact, do a correlation with the grooming gang places. And you'll find that instead of looking at it as just a Muslim issue, you'll see this as an underlying feature in what's taken place. No government department, the Conservatives sadly were not brave enough to do the research. In fact, the report they released was doctored, amended, and it's the biggest piece of fiction I've seen since the dodgy dossier used by Tony Blair to take us to the first Iraq war. So that's my viewpoint on that. Now, so we're clear. Arood Shah, leader of Oldham Council, Jim McMahon's right-hand man, chair of the National Constitutional Committee of the Labour Party, repeatedly cries victim of racism. She stood up in the council chamber and claimed making reference to mango chutney is racist. Her council legal team have tried to take an injunction out against me for making reference to samosas, amongst other things. I'm not joking. Failed. So she cries victim. She plays the race card constantly. And if the race card isn't working, it's the misogyny card or the Islamophobia card. And that's a definition for another day we'll talk about. Her car was blown up. It was portrayed as a racially motivated crime. We released the video footage. GMP won't arrest her or issue a statement after seeing the video footage. The video footage clearly shows something else went on. It had nothing to do with it being a racially motivated crime. This is 21st century Greater Manchester. In fact, the chief constable put a medal on her chest after we removed her from power first time round. So Greater Manchester Police are in on this. When we talk about Labour's links with organised crime, Greater Manchester Police, Andy Burnham's department, he has oversight of the police. They're partners in this. And when we talk about organised crime, Arood Shah, now, I forgive her on this. Her brother. Her brother is a convicted money launderer. Now, whilst you can't pick your family, understandably, what Arood Shah then did was some dodgy deal where she backdated her ownership of an ice cream lounge after she was exposed as having owned it. Backdated her declaration. All went hush hush. Her brother's involved in it somewhere. And those of you familiar with towns like Oldham, you will know all about the chicken shops, for money laundering, and human trafficking. And what I mean by that is bringing in people unlawfully, illegally, putting them up in sweatshops and having them work for you for nothing whilst they pay off their transportation. I'm not saying she's involved in that, but I'm saying her brother is a convicted money launderer. Oldham, that's how we launder money in Oldham, or one of the ways. And she did backdate her ownership of an ice cream lounge, so she tried to keep it hidden until we exposed it. And if there's any doubts about her links to organised crime, there's two individuals in particular, a man called Zia Hussain. She's photographed out with celebrating her election victory when she first got elected. That man kidnapped and tortured a young man. When the police turned up, they found blood splattered all over the wall. Convicted of kidnapping and torturing. And of course, the infamous Irish shimmy that she hangs off the arm of Dale Cregan's getaway driver, convicted heroin dealer. And now a vigilante police officer, part-time freelance police officer of some form, with a high-vis green Oldham Council issued vest, policing the streets of Oldham, who was out campaigning for her in the most recent elections. He's had 2 convictions against me, and they've both been where he's tried to stop me from campaigning against the Labour Party and his female childhood friend. Chair of the National Constitutional Committee with direct links with organised crime, ignored. Why? Because, in my opinion, Oldham is not alone. What I'm describing that's taking place in Oldham takes place in all towns and cities with a significant Muslim population. And when we say Muslim population, in the UK context, what do we really mean? We mean mainly Pakistani and also Bangladeshi. So the exact sort of demographics that Oldham has over towns and cities. Irish Image name is Mohammed Imran Ali. For those who want to know, type it in Google, you'll see. And Arood Shah has got direct links, not just as a chair of the National Constitutional Committee, with Jim McMahon, the MP, who is a Secretary of State. And there are question marks over his links with Irish IMI as well. Okay, so that's where we're up to in terms of Labour's links with organised crime. So the question really is, why is the Labour Party associated with men like this? And for me, it's just one issue, one reason. Men like this collect postal votes. Men like this make sure people in the community vote the way they want them to vote. And I say this from experience. I say this from my own experience. In elections, in recent elections, where I've been campaigning, and I've spoken directly to people, they said to me, Roger, they came to my house for my vote, and my wife's vote. They knew exactly, they'd got hold of the postal vote registers, which are legal documents that the candidates or the parties can get hold of. They then passed them on to the gangster affiliates who went knocking on people's doors. And a friend of mine said to me, Roger, what do you think I was going to do when the local heroin dealer comes knocking on my door and reads out a list of 6 votes in my house? And he also knows where my cousins live, who has another 3 or 4 votes. What do you think I did? I went and collected 10 postal votes and signed them and handed them over. It gets worse. I also have friends of mine who had their doors knocked on. You're registered to vote, aren't you? Your wife's registered, your 2 kids are registered. Yeah, Asian houses, multi-generational, it's how we live. So we sign you up for a postal vote. It'd be easier for you, won't it? Heroin dealer, stood on the doorstep. It'd be easier for you, won't it? If we sign you up for a postal vote. Here. You just press this and then we'll register you for a postal vote. I'll come round next week to collect it. What are you going to do? If you're in any of these positions, what would you do? Would you go to the police? Would you bugger go to the police? When you know the police are in bed with them anyway. Would you go to the newspapers? Would you go to the Oldham Times? So what do? You do as you're told for a quiet life, and you hand over. You register yourself for a postal vote and you hand over your postal vote. So that is why I believe Labour is associated with men like these. They're the muscle in the communities and it's in their interest. And I believe this takes place across the country, in predominantly Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities across the country. It is about postal vote control. And this is when I had a chuckle. Remember when George Galloway got elected in the by-election? Now, clearly there's no evidence, and I'm not making the suggestion at all, that George Galloway was directly involved in this. But what happened was, of the 31,107 votes cast in the Rochdale by-election, 13,460 were postal votes. So 13,460 of these votes. So in Rochdale, by-election, and I want to show you this. George Galloway comes along and he engages with the Muslim community. So Galloway has formed with the Muslim community and exploiting Labour's failings. So when the Muslim community is unhappy with the Labour Party, Galloway is there to exploit it. He went to Bethnal Green after the first Iraq War, or the second Iraq War, sorry, exploited it. He went to Bradford, exploited it, and then he came to Rochdale at the time of the Gaza conflict. All Muslim. Labour votes. And there is a method in which you take the Muslim Labour votes. And Galloway understands it. 1. You promote the politics of Muslims. I know it's easily said, but what I mean by that is the international stuff. It's not about Muslim communities being discriminated in Bethnal Green or getting being hard done to, or in Bradford or in Rochdale. No, it means you exploit the sectarian divisions at a global level. The West is the enemy, and the Muslims need to stick together, and you do that. 2, what he does is he understands how these communities work, so he engages with the community leaders. And what we mean by that is clan leaders, because the Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities slightly different, but in essence the same. These are clans, tribes. So he finds the tribal elders, the tribal leaders who have influence, and in the Bangladeshi areas it's by district. It's which district you come from in Bangladesh, rather than tribe or clan. But he does the same. He engages with the community leaders. And 3, he mobilizes. And he mobilizes, and everywhere he goes, the postal vote comes into play. So all this time, the Labour Party position is, all this time, Labour Party, who introduced the postal vote by opt-in, it was Tony Blair, where anyone could, a postal vote on demand, they called it, Tony Blair introduced it. They always say, no evidence of postal vote fraud. And the official figures all say no evidence of postal vote fraud. All the time. And they even campaigned against voter ID, which the Conservative government brought in at the request of the Electoral Commission, by the way, who produced a paper a number of years ago which identified Oldham in one of the voter fraud hotspots in the country, along with a whole host of other towns and cities where, if you correlated all of it, the grooming gangs, what we talk about in terms of the block Muslim vote, the 57 constituents we talked about, there'll be a correlation. There'll be a correlation with all that. And if you wanted to take it to a dark place, I'm sure if you looked at the conviction rate of heroin dealers and stuff, you'll see another correlation. Again, these are conversations our country does not want to have, our government does not want to have. Well, how can you fix any of this if you don't want to have the conversations in the first place? You notice I'm not blaming anyone, I'm not saying anything racist, I'm not saying anything prejudiced. It's because I know how to talk about these issues. So Galloway comes along and he wins. And it's actually the Labour Party supporters, the left, who start talking about postal votes. It's not us. It's the Labour Party supporters who've now had been beaten at their own game, I would say, and now complaining about postal vote fraud. So in Rochdale, there was 31,107 votes cast. Of that, 13,460 voted by post, and 12,335 voted for Galloway. And the fact check service, which is what I put this up from, said, oh, no. Because the Labour Party lot were saying, look, they were saying 12,335 voted for Galloway, of which 13,000, so they've assumed that all of his votes were postal vote, and they said, oh, 90%, 91%, which is that is, of postal votes went to Galloway. And it's not that it's not true. We can't prove it to be true. And the reason we can't prove it to be true is in the United Kingdom, they now do two things with postal votes. They've always done one, but they now have seemed to do two things. One is, whilst they know that 13,460 voted were postal votes, and whilst they've got the figures, they refuse to say how many of those postal votes voted for a candidate. You can see the Electoral Commission quote there. It is not possible to know the number of percentage. It is not possible to know the number or percentage of postal votes each candidate receives in an election, a spokesperson said. Why? Should it not be possible? Because if I had my way, I would have two things done. One is postal votes per candidate. Votes in person. Let's see it. Let's see it. And then total it, and whoever wins, wins. Why won't they do that? They've got the capacity to do that. They've got the resources to do that. In fact, they've got everything. They do that, and then they mix it up. And they mix it up to hide two things. They mix it up. So at a local council election, you know on a ward by ward basis how many postal votes and how many in-person votes at a ward council election. You know what they do at a constituency election on purpose? So there are 9 wards. I'll just put 3 on there. In-person vote. So it says there's 100, 100, 100, yeah. And the postal votes, they know how many people from that ward voted by post. But they hide it by mixing all the postal votes together. So they mix them beforehand from everywhere and then put a cell X number in. And do you know why they do that, in my opinion? The reason we do that in the United Kingdom, in my opinion, is to hide the corruption of postal vote fraud in predominantly Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities. The Muslim communities. And for that to happen, for that to be allowed to happen, our government is complicit. And the Conservatives, who've been in control for so long, all they had to do was to deal with this was three things. All the Conservatives had to do, and they didn't do, and for this I will never forgive them. Not that I voted for him, but I will never forgive him. I think it's unforgivable. I generally think it's unforgivable. All the Conservatives had to do to fix this issue was one, reform postal vote law. So you've got to have a reason to have a postal vote. It's not vote by demand. You've got to be ill, you've got to be out of the country, so on and so on. You've got to be registered disabled. There's a whole host of things they could have done and willed it back to before how it was before Tony Blair changed it. And two, all they had to do in terms of postal vote itself was count postal votes separately and make this public. So, for instance, Jim McMahon won in Oldham West with 13,000 votes. Of these, 7,000 were postal votes. I'm making this up, but I'm just showing you as an example. And of his 13,000 votes from his 9 wards, but there's a breakdown of in-person votes and postal votes. So 500, 20, 1,000, 4,000. You understand? Yeah? With the names of the wards, like Royton North, Royton South, Coldhurst, and so on. That is called transparency. That is called openness. The Conservatives had their opportunity to safeguard our democracy and failed to do so. Do you think the Labour Party are going to change it? Are they? Bugger. Are they bugger? Because it suited them. And it's all about postal vote control. And the first time I ever saw the Labour Party complain about it is when Galloway won in the by-election. So it's real when they're losing. Otherwise, we're far-right racist conspiracy theorists. Now I want to talk to you about how the Labour Party got to where they got to in terms of ethnic minority communities. Long before Galloway won the election in May in Rochdale, the Labour Party were already holding a series of crisis meetings across the country. Muslim councillors, if you remember, were resigning en masse over Starmer's stance on Gaza. The denial of water didn't go down well. War crime. And the core vote in an increasingly politicised Pakistani and Bangladeshi community, politicised through a Muslim lens, the voter base was hammering, losing votes. So this is what they did. Why? Because the Labour Party were already engaging in this community, exploiting these tensions to get their votes, secure the votes in the first place. First of all, they exploited sectarian divisions within the Muslim communities. So they played Pakistanis off against Bangladeshis, they played Pakistanis off against Pakistanis, and so on. So they were doing that already many, many years ago. They were targeting people in communities, not because they were citizens of that town. They weren't like you're an alderman and we can make a difference for you. They were always playing identity politics. They always say, no, we're here for the black community. We're here for the African Caribbean community. We're here for the Polish community. We're here for this, we're here for that. They'd find the ethnic or the religious feature of someone's identity. So that's what they were doing. And as Galloway picked up on it, because Galloway was once a Labour Party MP himself, wasn't he? They mobilised community leaders that could help shore up the Muslim vote. They recruited community leaders. And how do you recruit community leaders? Samosas, mango chutney, brown envelopes, you decide. And once they'd recruited these people and rewarded them, they called in favours. They called in favours in particular from the minority organisations that had historically benefited from funding. I'd say not in an above board manner. For instance, my own mosque Oldham Central Mosque, secretly funded by the Labour Party Council. Interest-free loan for 18 years. I think they only paid it back because we exposed it. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut and gone and seen the mosque, and they'll have put a little plaque up for me. The Ghazali Trust. And there's examples of this across the country. The Ghazali Trust in my town took over the swimming baths. Basically handed over to them for next to nothing. There's currently an issue going on right now over two plots of land. One is the Pakistani Community Centre in Glodick, where games are being played, and the other one is the Grange all-weather pitch, the sports pitch on the old Grange school site. Now, they're going to be handed over in exchange for, not for this, in exchange for, yeah. And when all that doesn't work, what the Labour Party has done very, very well is that they have, it's in the DNA of my community, in the communities I come from, that the Labour Party is what protects us from the far right. The Labour Party is on the side of the minority. The Conservatives are racist. The Liberal Democrats want to change the gender of our children. But the Labour Party will protect us. The Labour Party are pro-immigrant, pro-Muslim, and you white folk are racists. So that's the historical link of how the Labour Party has got its tentacles, firmly within the Pakistani and Muslim communities. But there's something gone on, and I want to share this with you. Over the last 2 or 3 decades, there's something gone on. It couldn't always stay like that. So there was a time, I'll write this down here, where in communities like mine, whilst the Labour Party represented us, it was white councillors, white politicians. They were our masters, we went to them, and it was the white politicians. And their partners were our community leaders. That's why Starmer met with community leaders a couple of weeks ago. Because in our communities, we had, and they were self-appointed community leaders really. They were the businessmen who won a little bit of money, maybe someone who was influential at the mosque. No one elected them. So it's very tribal, very undemocratic, but they'd go and reinforce that undemocratic sort of engagement. So it was our community leaders were their partners, but our representation was from white politicians. And the policies of the party was very much on protecting minority groups. I'm talking about the 70s, the 60s, the 70s, the early 80s. Yeah. And whilst the people in our community had a religious identity, sorry, I'm just talking. Whilst the people had a religious identity, that religious identity was very much in a personal space. In a public space, the identity was very much around our ethnic identity. We're Pakistanis or we're Bangladeshis. And actually, we weren't even that. We were black. We're a minority group. That's what the term black and minority ethnic. We belong to that group. Were in many ways, it was the African Caribbean community who were a bit more established, who were our voices. So that's how it used to be. But what I want to say to you there, I want you to focus on, we were represented by white politicians. So in a ward such as Coldust, where I was raised, Coldust would have 3 white councillors, of which Gary's guitar book's grandfather was one of them. Okay. Of course, looking back, it's very obvious that whilst Labour enjoyed that relationship, those with more sinister motives in that community, in the communities where I come from, weren't going to allow that to continue forever. So these communities went from majority white representation to minority white. And all of this shifted as well, not to a good place. So it went to, from 3 councillors, 1 white councillor, to represent what was interestingly a majority, still a majority white ward, but the white people didn't vote en masse or didn't vote at all. So the smaller block Muslim vote in some of these areas, only 30% BME representation, but there might as well be 60 or 70 in the way they vote and the strategic way they vote. 1 white councillor and 2, I use the acronym BME, black and minority ethnic, but what I really mean is Muslim, Pakistani and Bangladeshi. Okay. And now, these community leaders were not just community leaders as they were before. They were in charge of services that the council funded in their communities. So there was a direct financial benefit for their partners. They controlled the community centres, the projects, the family members, all of that. Now the policies, now remember I talked previously, the policies was about protecting these communities. The policies now shifted to prioritising, not protecting, prioritising black and minority ethnic communities. And before someone wants to come and arrest me again or call me a racist, the government's own documents post the 2001 riots confirmed this. The way in regeneration funding had been unevenly distributed. Why? Were these communities, were the BME people in these communities poorer than their white counterparts? No. They had councillors, they voted, they rewarded, they controlled. You can see how it's all linked. But who wants a seat at the table when you can sit at the head of the table? And this situation of 1 out of 3 and diverting funding, no. That wasn't going to last, was it? And that wasn't going to last because we've now got a position what I call cartel dependency. And to understand this, or see the signs of this, again, let's have this quadrant up so you see it. These are now wards where all the councillors are black and minority ethnic, or again, as I say, when you look at a town like Oldham, Muslim. All of them Muslim. Even though there is a significant white community still in these areas, in these wards, all of the representation is by Muslims. They also control the council. So they have leadership positions. So the politicians aren't just looking inward anymore, they're looking outward to the council and to the MP. They're making moves. The partners, well, they're a bit more overt now. They're actually diverting funding, and transferring assets. To their family members. But you can't see it as diverting members of funding to their family members, because in the way the United Kingdom registers declarations of interest, it's your husband or your wife or your partner or your children. Our families don't work that way. Brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, cousins, and then it becomes invisible. Remember when we talked about cartels? The definition of cartel included the word secret. Well, the way we record information, it is secret, as in the council in government. But where I come from, it's very clear what's going on. So the partners are now their own family members. The partners also, worryingly, are the mosques, as in the people who run the mosques. Again, I come to Oldham. Abdul Jabbar, who's in control of Oldham Council's finances, his brother, Abdul Karim, controls the central mosque. In fact, the committee, almost exclusively, are Labour Party members. The community centres they control. And if they don't control them, their mates, the council is transferring assets or selling public assets at mates rates prices to their extended family members. All in plain sight. And the policies now, instead of protecting the minority ethnic communities, which it once did, instead of prioritising the minority ethnic communities, which it did following that, now punishes other communities. And if you say anything, it's set up in such a way where you branded far right and racists. Greater Manchester Police have a complaint as a report of a crime that they've not done anything about to this date, which was a mosque in the lead up to this election issued a fatwa. Essentially issued a religious decree of who to go out and vote for. That's what we've come to in the United Kingdom. So there is this cartel, what I describe on. I actually think I'm being generous with my use of word dependency. I think I'm being generous. What I actually mean is cartel control. Town is controlled by cartels. Far right? No. I'm simply analysing things objectively in the way I see them. And I'm quantifying it to you as to what's gone on. I'm pointing out the indicators. I mean, how can we, as a country, and I say this as an ethnic minority in this country, how can we have gone in these towns where, first of all, the policy priority was to protect Muslims because we were discriminated against? I didn't see that much discrimination in that way, but, fine, I get it. Promote, or even prioritise us. Okay. There's an argument, again, it's not something I agree with, but there's an argument for, what's the phrase? Positive discrimination. It was a policy for a long time in this country, not just on race and religion, but on gender. How can we go from that, protect, to promote or prioritize, to actually punish? What have I done? Punish the majority community or other communities. And there's a direct correlation here with representation. Political representation. In terms of no Muslim representation, so exclusive Muslim representation. And that is what's gone on. And I I know that isn't, I'm not just talking about Oldham. Why? Maybe people don't understand it. Maybe people looking at the wrong issue are looking at it in the wrong way. And I'll talk about that later. Jonathan Reynolds, I think, he's got kicked out and he was a shadow works and pensions. Now he's in charge of some think tank for Keir Starmer. Lost his seat to a pro-Palestinian Muslim. It would have been worse for the Labour Party. It would have been worse for the Labour Party. But across the country, what the Labour Party did, the lead up to the election, they suddenly became pro-Palestinian. They were playing on this. Remember, this was also in the local elections, where local elections had nothing to do with it. In my own town in Oldham, the Labour Party passed a motion around Palestine. Like, I'm thinking, what the fuck? What about passing a motion on the bins being cleaned up properly? You know, something you actually have power over. But they passed a motion on Palestine. Arood Shah, the leader of the council, was seen with a Palestinian ambassador. McMahon, Secretary of State, now suddenly started talking about Palestinian rights. What about the rights of the working class girls gang raped in your own town? Absolute silence. So the Labour Party, I mean, is that the right word? It's either appeasement or they manipulated him. It's one or the other. And all the time they were doing this. All the time. I mean, how do you think other parties, other groups of people in the town or towns like ours felt? And already disenfranchised, demonized. Dispossessed. Is that my spelling right? White working class community. How are they supposed to feel? How are other minority groups supposed to feel? But what Labour got wrong, and they didn't see it coming, was all the time they were pandering to this Muslim identity agenda, Muslim victimhood agenda, whatever your phrase is you prefer, through the cartels. What they didn't see was, from the other side, that a Muslim-focused demographic was emerging. And this is what took place. So you saw pretty much for the first time, we saw it play out at the local election and the general election. What we saw was the Labour Party endorsed Cartel candidate go up against the Cartel candidate endorsed by the Muslims. So it wasn't a Muslim candidate in terms of an Islamist candidate. So it wasn't a political Muslim, which is what I mean by Islamist. It was a cartel candidate endorsed by the Muslims. Dangerous. Dangerous. There's layers here I'm trying to explain to you, and it'd be easier for me to do it face to face. So what Labour have now got is this dilemma. You have the Labour Party and the way in which it engages with Muslim communities. You've got the Razala Khan sort of girl, yeah, doctor, MP. The secularists, they're like me. You know, they've joined the Labour Party, well, not like me in that sense, but they've joined the Labour Party for politics. They agree with the values. The manifesto pledges, yeah, all of that. They're actually in an increasing minority. Because you've got the cartels. These are the ones who exploit the ethnic lines, yeah, play the clan politics, all the dirty stuff that we've talked about. You've got the sectarians. And the only difference here, really, is they're both cartels. But the sectarians, you know, they're kind of saying, oh yeah, we're really secularist, like, you know, the Arud Shah sort of, you know, type of people. We believe in Labour Party policies and all of these. Just sectarian, like, oh, stuff that. That's where our voter base is coming from. And the Labour Party, well, they're stuffed, aren't they? And this is the civil war that's been played out. Because the civil war that's really been played out, you forget these lot. Actually, forget that. What really is here is the rise of influence, of relevance of the mosques, of the global Muslim identity, and actually the politicization of the Muslim community. And increasingly, this is more powerful than this. And that's a dilemma for the Labour Party. I don't think it's a dilemma they've stopped to consider properly yet. But the consequence of this dilemma will have huge ramifications for us in the rest of the country. Because what will the Labour Party do? They're reliant on this vote. If not for MP levels, then definitely to control the councils. They're reliant on the vote, aren't they? Let's look at Oldham. Oldham Council. 14 of the 27 Labour councillors are Muslim. More than half. Yeah. 8 of the Oldham Group sectarians are also Muslim. The majority of these, well, at least 4 of these, were previous Labour Party councillors themselves. So 22 of the 60. And that's just the Labour Party feature. The Conservatives have tried pandering with these. The Lib Dems have tried and failed, thankfully. But they've tried. And come the next local election, this is what's going to happen. And I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry to share this with you. We've already got an overrepresentation, yeah? 22 out of 60 is over a third, yeah? We've already got an overrepresentation. Well, in key battleground, and I'll pick them for you, I'll show you. Waterhead. The Labour candidate, sectarian, Oldham Group. Sorry, I don't know what I did there. It's a white guy called Peter Dean, veteran councillor, white. The Cartel will put up a Pakistani, Muslim. Sorry, the sectarian, Cameron Gufaw's lot. 100%, I'm telling you now. Peter Dean will be ready to resign. I have no doubts about that whatsoever. I'll pick another area, Hollingwood. Until very recently, all 3 councillors in Hollingwood were white. All 3 are now Asian. 2 Cartel. Sorry, 2 sectarian and 1 Labour. And the only reason Labour won was because the sectarians couldn't get their act together properly. Lost by, I think, about 40 votes or 50 votes. So up this time is a guy. Who's up next time? It's Mushtaq, isn't it? Mushtaq's up. 100%. And if these guys don't like me calling them sectarians, well, they are. 100% they will put up a Pakistani Muslim. The Oldham Group, what a name, eh? Will put up a Pakistani Muslim. And look at Alexander. Another ward. Is Mushtaq up? No, sorry, that's Mushtaq's up in Alexander. Sorry, my mistake. Councillor Mushtaq's up in Alexander. 100%. You'll see the sectarian Oldham Group in Alexander put up a Pakistani Muslim. Look at Hollingwood. Well, Wahid's up. Absolute disgrace of a man. Sectarian Oldham Group. Abdul Wahid. And I'll do a piece on Wahid and his boys, I promise you. It'll be one of the dispatches, don't worry. The Labour Party, until recently, all 3 of them, remember, were white. They won't put up a white candidate. There's not a chance in hell Arud Shah will put up a white candidate. She'll put up a Muslim Pakistani. A Pakistani Muslim. Medlock Vale. where there's a Labour candidate up. A Pakistani Labour candidate up. I forget who's up. One of the Pakistani Labour lot are up. One of our religious Pakistanis are up. 100% the sectarians will put up a Pakistani Muslim. And so it goes on and so it goes on, apart from the areas where there's a truce between them. And the area where there's a truce between them, where you won't see the sectarian Oldham group put up a candidate or campaigning anyway, is in Wornath, where their guy is essentially the Labour guy. Watch. This isn't Labour fighting on policy. This is Labour fighting elections underpinned by sectarian politics, racial divisions, religious, I'll put a question mark, radicalisation, extremism, separateness, there's a, something there. I don't want to say the word. I'm not sure what the word is actually. I'm thinking about it, but definitely. Stuff the rest. Stuff the white working class. Stuff the secular Muslims. And this isn't just being played out in Oldham. This will be played out across the country. And remember, the Oldham group. So there's no ambiguity. On record. For the conflict in Gaza, they are on record. The candidate, a solicitor, claims he's a human rights solicitor. Is he bollocks a human rights solicitor? Got 8,000, 9,000 votes off the back of this. Zafar Iqbal off the back of this. All of his publicity was for Gaza, and they promoted a one-state solution, and that state was Palestine. And for that to happen, that is a mainstream political party. And do you know what the sad thing was? It wasn't that I got 2,500 votes. I'm the one who said this is wrong. Labour wouldn't say this was wrong. Because they're fighting it out in these very communities on these very issues. And that takes us to this. What happens in a town like ours? Well, Labour will become increasingly Muslim. Well, Muslim's the wrong word. Increasingly sectarian. Pandering to that. The Oldham group, well, the question mark is, will they sustain it, or will they be replaced by outright Islamists? Will the mosques put up their own candidates directly? I'm asking you, I don't know. If I was to bet, oh, why do you need a Cameron Gaffer? Cut out the middleman. Because we know he's come over from here. He's come over from Labour and he's come over from the Conservatives because he wasn't able to get in charge of these places. So he's come over here. These people who run the mosques aren't stupid. They'll just cut out the middleman. You've got the Tories and the Lib Dems who don't have a single ethnic minority between them. The criticism of that is that then, how are they engaging with the voter base here? They're not. I suppose Sam Al-Hamdani, I'm being unfair, but I understand what I mean. They don't have a Pakistani or Bangladeshi councillor between them. They've both played to Ghaffar and the likes of Ghaffar. I want to ask you something. If a far-right organisation had political representation on Oldham Council that called for the forceful removal of all minority groups from the UK, what do they call it? Repatriation. I'm saying that as the equivalent to a one-state solution. Yeah, eradication of Islam, let's call it repatriation. I can guarantee you there would be a national outcry, and more so, that these opposition parties won't be pally with them. They won't be sat there giggling with them in the council chamber. The council officers would refuse to work with them, as they have done before, when BNP councillors were lawfully elected. So that's what the future holds for towns like ours, and towns like yours that have a similar demographic to towns like mine. And then the white working class, who could never vote for Labour because their grandfather would roll in his grave or something like that. Whatever the terminology is, you'll have to excuse me. If your grandfather knew what was really going on with how the Labour Party and what they were doing and how they're covering up the gang rape of working class white girls, your grandfather, if he wouldn't roll in his grave, turn in his grave, what's the phrase? I don't know. He'd climb out of his grave and come and slap you. So instead of voting Conservatives or Liberal Democrats who are genuine political parties with the nous to be able to do something, they've gone and elected in my town the likes of a man called Brian Hoban in Failsworth, who's a convicted fraudster, and a man called Mark Hince from Shaw and Crompton, who's a red-nosed drunk dials people. And what have they done once you've elected these people? They got bought out by Labour anyway. And not just bought out by Labour, then they voted to help cover up the gang rape of children. They voted against the motion from these people. It's a matter of fact. And if it's not these, you've got the likes of a woman called Maggie Hurley from the Royton Independents. All the big talk, quiet as a mouse in the council chamber, completely ineffective. I'm sorry, it's a mess, isn't it? That diagram's a mess, and I'm sharing with you what is essentially also a mess. My name is Raja Mir. I've been at this for 6 years. I've been doing this type of work for 30 years. Fighting extremists, safeguarding communities, protecting children. They've tried to put me in prison for it. If you take value, at the very least perhaps think about subscribing to the YouTube channel where I put these dispatches out eventually for free. They are recorded live as I'm pointing to my screen. There's an audience watching this as I speak. My work is entirely community funded. There's a web page called Red Wall and the Rabble. You can sign up there. All of my written content is shared for free. This is shared for free. You might want to buy me a coffee. There's a link somewhere on the description. You'll find a link. Or you can take out a paid subscription, which is a monthly contribution to us helping keep me going and keep me doing the work and speaking out on behalf of not just the people in my town, but people across our country who are experiencing these issues and they don't know where to turn to. And increasingly, the places you turn to have been demonized or exploited already, and you'll end up in prison, which is where they tried to put me. I'll see you for the next dispatch. Hope you enjoyed it. Good evening.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.